All right, let's talk more on this story. Joined now by political analyst, Professor Dirk Kotze, and taking your thoughts as well, 072110558. Are political parties honest about their funding? What are your thoughts tonight? You can tweet us also at Newzroom 405. Prof, good evening, and thank you very much for coming on tonight.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
Let's start with these gala dinners. Are these gala dinners a backdoor way of getting 1.2 million rands without declaring it?
Well, that is so, but that's all over the world. It's not a South African thing. The ANC is doing it. Their Progressive Business Forum has done it over many years. It's an established practice all over the world. All political parties are doing that in order to do fundraising. It's not, therefore, in principle, something which is strange or unusual or undemocratic or any other form of misrepresenting themselves. This is part of party politics all over the world.
Is it not also probably where the Political Party Funding Act falls short? The fact that it does not cover this aspect of things?
No, I've been myself very much involved in the Party Funding Act as it went through Parliament. I made some presentations there. And the Party Funding Act is something very specific, and it is about donations. And it is about donations, especially by big donors, especially business groups. And the idea about the regulation of that is to make sure that they don't develop a certain sort of position in relation or relationship with a particular political party, especially the governing party, which means that they will be in a favorable position compared to others, that there will be in effect a form of conflict of interest that will develop, because they will be seen as an organization or a business close to a political party, and therefore they will develop a type of a favoritism relationship with them. And that is what the reason why this type of legislation, which again is being used in many parts of the world, the idea of thresholds as in South Africa is the international norm. What my vote counts is asking for is not at all the norm anywhere in the world.
But how do you then gauge, Prof, the influence that big donors of 1.2 million sitting at the platinum table next to Julius Malema would have on the party's policies, right? Because you're paying 1.2 million rands to have nice rice and meat and maybe some dessert and listen to the entertainment. It's in essence a donation to the party, and what do you get in return for that?
Well, the first point is this is happening in public. Everyone can see it happening. The idea about the party funding is in order to make it public, and that is why the disclosure must happen. In this case, therefore, the disclosure in effect has already happened by the fact that they are sitting there with Julius Malema or Floyd Shivambu, whoever else. The media will be there. They will see who's sitting next to whom. So that sense of relationship is already made public. The whole notion about declarations of income, of donations, is that transparency concept. Yeah. At the same time, in our case and in many other countries also, there is a maximum threshold. In our case, it's 15 million rand. So you are talking about 1.2 million or so, but the real threshold that exists in South Africa is actually 15 million. And that is the maximum that one donor can give to a political party in one financial year. So that is the reality. And I think this is what the sort of the scale that we have to keep in mind when we talk about these things. From someone who's giving a donation of, let's say, 500 rand or so, which is not disclosed, or 1,000 rand that's not disclosed, up to 15 million that must be disclosed. Yeah. So that is where the practicality of these things come in. It is simply impossible for any political party anywhere in the world to disclose all the income that they receive at events that they organize. And that is why this threshold between 100,000 and 15 million is what is included in our legislation. And it has gone through a process. Initially, when, for example, I made my inputs in it, there were no thresholds at all. And we had to argue that there should be thresholds of especially maximum thresholds for this purpose.
Yeah. It's not the norm, it's an exception to the norm, but my vote count says we must have a look at that limit of disclosures of a single donation sitting at 100,000 rands. And the economic freedom fighters, they themselves have come out and said to their people, well, donate below the threshold and then you'll be saved. Your names are not going to be published. And my vote count saying that's precisely the problem, because if you look at the amounts that are being donated below the threshold versus the amount that are being donated above the threshold, especially for the smaller parties, you'll find that the amounts that are being donated below the threshold in their entirety are actually more than the amounts that are being donated above the threshold.
See, the reality is that if you are a small party, like let's say the Freedom Front Plus or the ACDP or Good Party or so, and you'd receive 100,000, yes, it's a lot of money for them, but they are not decision makers. They don't take decisions about who to receive contracts, who are the persons who will have the influence on the decision making of government. So the question is, why be so concerned about the money that they do receive? Because
Prof, these days, if you, for example, look at local government, two seat parties are actually quite influential in making big decisions.
No, well, local government is excluded, for example, from the public funding component of this. They are also excluded from this legislation completely excludes local government. It's only applicable to parties involved in national and provincial legislatures where they receive public funding from also. So in that sense, it is, when it comes to whether they will receive money and they are only represented at local government level, yes, then they will have to disclose that. But those parties at this stage are not going to make, if you give any party 100,000 rand, you don't buy that party. You can't control that party at all. So in that sense, one has to develop a certain sense of scale, a certain sense of context.
So it's your submission, Prof, having been part of this team as well that looked at these at this act, that donations below the threshold, especially for the small parties, have got no material impact on political decision making.
That's indeed so, and it's actually encouraged. Because what I'm saying to political parties in general also is that should be encouraged, that they try to get more and more funding from local people, from persons who are willing to give them 100 rand, 1,000 rand, and so on. Because what does it mean? It brings them closer to their constituency. They don't go to the big funders, to the big business people in order to give them 1 million rand or so. Rather, and that is the practice all over the world. If you go to most big parties in the world, their main campaigns for getting money from their supporters is small amounts of money. And that gives them that direct link to their constituents, to their supporters at grassroots level. Our parties are not doing it, and I think this is one of the weaknesses of our parties.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier, of course, the limit. The actual limit is at 15 million rands per person. And one of the challenges there that my vote count says, well, it only looks at a juristic person to the exclusion of natural persons. That's one. But two, it does not count the accumulated donation by a donor related to one another. So they make an example of a Patrice Motsepe who has a number of entities, and one can give the limit of 15 million, another can give a limit of 15 million, another, and the accumulated effect of that it's actually above the limit in a sense, because then it becomes 45 million as opposed to 15 million.
Yes, that is indeed correct. That is one of the weaknesses of the legislation. There are many other weaknesses also. For example, one of the weaknesses which I particularly identified is that foreign governments are not allowed to give donations to political parties, but other foreign political parties are allowed to do it. That's not excluded. So there are still, this is far from a perfect legislation, and therefore it is worth arguing that it should be revisited on a regular basis in order to close some of the loopholes that do exist at the moment.
Yeah. Does the issue, I suppose, of lifting the threshold as being suggested now by the African National Congress, who are finding it difficult, supposed to raise the money that they need to raise to pay their staff and so on and so forth, is that a threat to this democratic process, as much as Action SA is saying what my vote counts is calling for may result into a challenge for the democratic principles?
Yes, I would personally be against the idea of increasing the threshold above 15 million. Initially, in the discussions in the parliamentary committee, the suggestion was 30 million before the legislation was finalized. Luckily, they brought it down to the 15 million where it is now. And I think that is already quite a high level to have it. But in order to follow what the ANC is asking for, to increase that threshold again, I think that will be not a good move to make. And that will, in a sense, undermine the notion of accountability in public, because 15 million or above 15 million is a very significant amount of money for any person or any political party.
Prof. Dirk Kotze, I appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on and for joining us tonight here on In Focus. Professor Dirk Kotze giving us some political analysis there on political party funding. This as Action SA has applied to be a respondent in this matter that My Vote Counts has brought to the Western Cape High Court. They've cited, of course, political parties represented in Parliament and the President, as well as the IEC, but Action SA, not represented in Parliament, says that this will have a detrimental impact not only on those represented in Parliament, but also on new parties trying to make their way in.